All right, so welcome to Psychonauts 2 The Lost Levels again. Today, we're going to be looking at Compton's Cookout, and we're going to see the brainstorm power, because when this level was originally built, there was the one major power that we cut from Psychonauts 2. And just
brainstorm or mental connection? Which one was harder?
Well, brainstorm because we got rid of it.
Or mental connection because we didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
We kept trying to make it work for way too long.
So what was the aesthetic framing for this space at this time?
This is a toy kind of land at this point, because Compton's kind of like a little bit
Yeah, we were
a young at heart.
Yeah, I think he had like regressed to a childlike state in our heads at this point, and we were like, because we were still trying to figure out like what is Compton's deal, and pretty late into this, and I think we went through a different couple versions of like what is his hang up, and I guess early on we tried like a childlike state, so it was like, oh, he's like keeping himself safe in this little like toy box in his brain, but obviously we didn't end that way, but there was, I think, some notable holdovers that we'll get to that I think are really nice. Like,
Yeah, Austin, if you want to like just run through the level a little bit and let's see.
Absolutely.
So we've got a dinner bell.
Inside a dinner bell.
Yeah.
Inside a dinner bell.
So the same sort of scene here with Compton where he confronts you and doesn't want to draw attention to himself in this tiny little enclosed space. But yeah, I think this was still even in the earliest days of the toy box concept, because none of that is really reflected in the actual level layout.
So at this stage also, the judge was basically the boss of the level.
Yes.
Yeah.
When we weren't sure if we were going to have bosses, really. Like you were just going to fight like a judge in like a chef's outfit.
Yeah.
You can already see that this is a sprawling nightmare, which is good in one sense because that's what his brain's supposed to feel like, but perhaps a bit too much for player clarity. There's like 20 different places you could go, and originally we had like this little recipe board, and this would be your place that you would come back and check on, and then you would like run in here and grab ingredients, and everything was just way too spread out. But you can already see a lot of the toy box elements here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So Will, were you doing a lot of the environment art for this?
Yeah, so like the only direction we had was like toys, but like old toys, so it had to be wood. And then if you want something flexible, it had to be wood blocks. So I made a wood block kit, and then that sort of like ended up becoming the floor and the walls and everything, and it's a little much, you know.
Yeah. This was back when we were real big on having kits for everything, and it just didn't work out.
But part of the reason we did the wood thing too is because we wanted to show every station affecting every ingredient in like a specific way, but obviously that was going to create like a huge art explosion if we did that. So we thought if we just gave everything like one seam that it would just like flop apart on, that would like save us a little bit of time. But
I think if you look at the materials on those, they're all felt as well.
Some of them are, yeah. But yeah, like every station basically was eventually simplified down to like its most basic thing. Like there's this whole mini game that you had to play to like get the ingredient to the cutting board, and then the cutting board would move around, and then you had to like time the stomp on the blades to like get them to like chop the ingredient while it was in motion on these rails. Like that's the story of every one of these stations basically, is that there were like 3 layers of complexity when you really only needed the final step.
I feel like being overwhelmed by all the possibilities from brainstorming was just like the team trying to live through the process of making this game.
Yeah.
Even just this text instruction here speaks to the insanity of what we were trying to like communicate to the player without having to like have this text literally just live in the level. Like you were supposed to like bring the ingredient out, use brainstorm on it, get it to turn into the thing that you wanted it to turn into by punching it at the right time. Like,
well, you don't even...
and that doesn't even work.
You don't even target it. It just shocks it when it's near it. So it's like, all right, and now
and
it's
then maybe
a
it
cake.
stays as the thing, yeah.
Yeah. Listen, the idea of turning Sasha into a squirrel was funny, and we were stuck on it for like a year.
Here, let me actually get an egg and see if I can take it to the boiler.
Yeah, there were like 3 stations that like cooked with fire, basically. And it was like, don't go to the wrong one.
Yeah, and see, here's the boiling pot there. And then this lid would close, and it was like a pressure cooker, and it would create these like steam hazards that you had to like... And then all the steam was gonna kick off on all these pipes, and then yeah, there was one output that you had to like come over here to like stomp down on to actually get it to. There's like this little timer. So yeah, this.
What?
To keep it going, there's a little timer moving on the front of the boiling pot, and to keep it going, you have to keep venting the pressure in this thing. And I think randomly one of these valves would like kick off. Right now, I think it's just continuing to do this same one over and over again. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Actually
yeah,
did
no.
switch. But yeah, you can see how like every one of these just was so multi-layered, and you know, at the end of the day, you don't want to like introduce this many possibilities for like failure, especially if these things are as far apart as they are, because it's just gonna. I mean, this level. I think if we had ended up making this, it would have taken you like an hour to beat this level.
No, we played through the last version of it, and it was longer than an hour.
Yeah,
it
I'm
was
sure,
a
yeah,
really
yeah.
long level, and that was kind of the whole reason why we like the final version of it is so much smaller. So like, we were looking at the total time to play the game, and it was coming in like a 40-hour game. Like, is it?
Particularly after we added the boss in.
Yeah.
For the final version, one of the things that we ended
whoops.
up doing was we cut it down to the 3 phases, because it was just like once the time limit went in, it was like this wasn't a level that people could play for an hour.
Yeah.
Like it was just too stressful with the time pressure just constantly going. And we're like, we just have to cut it down. This level in particular is one of the Psychonauts 2 levels that could just be like an entire indie game.
Yeah.
And so we really had to dial it back to focus on the story.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think once we put the timer in,
Yeah.
there was this feeling of we want to be multitasking, right? That's what's stressful in it, but you can't multitask if you have to babysit every station, you know?
Right. Or you can't even really keep an eye on what's happening at the other places. Like in the shipping version, you could kind of look over at a glance and get a sense of like, oh, something's happening over there, or at least that's finished. But yeah, that was just never going to happen here. And then another thing too, like this again, you know, is yet another thing that Brainstorm was used for, was to temporarily power things on. So once you got everything sorted in here, then you would brainstorm this thing in the center, and then it would start to transform everything.
Yeah. I mean, this was
there we go. So
this was that part was my fault. I was like, I want Brainstorm to make electricity because it shocks things. It's the crystal cart
from Crystal.
And then you would take that into an elevator, like into a dumbwaiter that would get served up at like this fancy feast where like all these little stuffed animals were gonna have a little dinner. And,
I mean, we kept that. There's still
which is
giant goats.
Yeah.
that part's great. Yeah. But I think there's supposed to be a whole cat. Like there was one drawing you had, Emily, of like a bunch of stuffed animals sitting and having like a fancy tea party, which I think was like the main inspiration for this room.
How was your mental well-being doing this?
I clearly haven't recovered. Still. Look at me.
Yeah.
Look at me.
This may be the end of the this section.
No. I remember now. You had to actually
Carry the
because
egg.
of course you do. You have to carry the dish, which you know is part of the fun of like having the giant things. Is that like you then get to like slow walk this over to everybody, and like I think there was going to be a ton of stuff on the table that you were like knocking into, and like
Was it heavy TK?
it was heavy
still?
TK. Yeah. So you would sort of be stumbling along with it, and then you would actually like give it to them. Yeah, there we go.
At this point, they're like plushies, they're like toys, and eventually they become the hand puppets, which is really cool because it becomes that reveal at the end of like, oh, it's like him being hard on himself. It's not toys being hard on him.
Right.
But yeah, we should look at some of these because there's some crazy.
I mean, you see, yeah. So there was some sense of like, you know, some of these things like being modeled after like other animals, because everything was animal. That was our other like, you know, sort of pillar in the level was like Compton talks to animals. So like maybe everything is like everything is sort of like animal
He's got a little
interface.
giraffe badge on his shirt.
So this was supposed to be like a toy blender that was also had like a fish face in it, and so you would like feed the ingredient in there, and then it had all these like spiky bits, and you had to like align this like these when you put an ingredient in. These 3 rings would fall out of alignment, and then you would have to like get them back into alignment, stomp on this thing. It's just madness. And then you could come down and then actually use the blender and stand here for 10 minutes, I guess, if you wanted to. Let's see. So there was that, and then there was a whole deep fryer thing.
what is this boat? Okay.
The deep. Wait,
No,
which
no,
one?
no. That thing up there.
This is the deep fryer.
Yeah, okay.
A big floating deep fryer in the sky, which was supposed to be like sort of like a. Was it like a Shark Tank fry basket kind of thing? Oh, no, it was a fishing game. Yeah. So you would like put the food into the fry basket. That would get reeled in by this giant like fishing hook. which you had to like go over here and manually reel by yourself.
I would just like to call out yet again the level of fidelity in Osif's block rules.
Yeah,
Like
it's
it's
wild.
everything's colored. Look at these machines that
Yeah.
are created. Like
There's
it's
so much in here. It's amazing.
So I think doing this would like reel the toy,
Yeah.
and then that would move the fry basket into place, or at least pull it out of it, and then it would land. The finished thing would land here.
we should put that in a game.
Yeah.
That seems like a good idea.
Yep.
Let's see, and then I know we've talked before in the documentary before about the battering ram, but there was this whole thing where like you storm this little castle, you like put the ingredient down here at the gate, yeah, and instead of hot oil, there's pancake batter that this
Yeah.
goat is vomiting into this container here, and you would have to like.
Vomit was in the level from the very
I
beginning.
mean, it was all part of the plan. I'm sure someone saw that and was like,
Never
"Wait."
throw out a good idea.
And then you would like come in here and like pull on this thing.
Oh, one of
and-
these things. Someone actually used them in a level other than me.
Yeah, there was like the descending switch.
Yeah.
And then that would coat the ingredient. But that's
hang
not all.
switch.
Then you would take that to the battered item to the deep fryer. I
This
did
is a
like
beautiful
these. Oh, thank you. I like these rolling pins covered in goop. So we had like sticky floors back then.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
like
yeah.
these parts were not covered in this sticky stuff, but you also didn't want to get hit by these like rams that were gonna bump you off, and just trying to fit every single idea.
Nice squirrel head.
Well, it's so funny too, because like the ram like roller pin is such an awesome thing, but Raz is so mobile you can like just jump over the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's hard to make that stuff in this game.
Which is why everything had to be so big too, so you couldn't do that. This was meant to be modeled after the diner.
yeah,
The
it
big
looks
stack
like
of
it does have the
pancakes.
Lumberstack sign on it at that point.
So like there was a whole thing where like you would get this little capsule toy of like pancake batter by stomping on this. And then it was a little potion. I'm just using the love potion that was also in the game at one point, and then you would bring that over to the griddle and throw it in one of these pans. And I think at this time, like this was another thing you had to power with brainstorm temporarily to turn it on.
Yeah.
But then like once it got going, it was like a hot floor, and like these pans would flip you out if you stayed in like one of them for too long. So you didn't want to be in that one, and your ingredient would just get cooked while you were trying to stay alive.
But you had to stay in here?
Well, you don't have to, I guess, but it's like if you wanted to
Well, your
not burn,
ingredient will burn,
right?
Yeah.
You
So
want
I
to keep
think
a close
it's
eye
burnt
on
to
it.
nothing right
Oh,
now.
yeah. And then, so you were having to brainstorm ingredients to change their type at this point, or do you think we added that in later?
No. I mean, it's not. I don't think you actually have to use it in this level, but that was still the goal.
Okay.
Was to do that. I don't remember the like punch to confirm this new state ever being in.
Required,
I think we kind of gave up on that.
Yeah.
But I mean, just in broad strokes, like that's kind of what this level was for a while, and then we left it alone and moved on to some other stuff.
I feel like I delivered some concept art, and then I can't remember where I am in time and space because I think I went to another level for a long time. So I think it was Osif alone for a long time doing this stuff. 'Cause I delivered something.
I think he had long periods alone.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of trying to catch up to him while he guitar soloed on the
Yeah.
But I was just like trying to find the in-between of like the design and the toy box aesthetic, and sometimes it didn't work. Well, obviously it didn't work in the end. But, but there's just so many cool like combinations of ideas in here in terms of your design also. Like we just weren't ready for it yet. You were ahead of your time.
I mean,
He was making his own game by himself.
That's honestly what it felt like sometimes, and that's it was hard because we were all working on like a million different things at the same time. So sometimes people were left alone, but I do think we resolved that process later, and there was more back and forth as like we entered the final years of the project, which is good.
Yeah. Going through each one of these levels, I think a really important thing is like, it's not like when we were trimming the game down or rebooting Brains that we were like starting completely from scratch each time. And it's not like we were like, wow, we have a lot of stuff that's just like not very interesting. We should cut it out of the game. It was like, we have so many ideas and a lot of them are viable, but like, how do we make them all coexist?
Yeah.
Well, and like a lot of it too is it's obfuscation, right? Where it's like this level is supposed to be about, feeling overwhelmed and like.
And you did it.
And
You
pressure.
did it.
But like it's like there's this point where you want the player to have that the illusion of that, but not actually be overwhelmed.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And it's like finding that balance is like really hard. Oh, I remember that. Don't those pop off and you have to like TK them back in?
Yeah, well, this was the thing where like the machine was clogged, so you had to like come up here and then like unclog it by pulling all these little things. But,
And then there's those goop spots on the ground, and it
Yeah.
sprays more of them out. So you.
yes, and you'd have to fight some bad guys up here.
I think we do because we do reuse that I think with the blender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of these ideas do get remixed back in, like the greatest hits, like
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it was just kind of a lot of just distilling all of the awesome that was in here and like trying to focus it as much as possible into like the tiniest amount of space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you take like small space, stressful, time constraint, and cooking, like it's like, duh, that's a cooking show. That's not a toy box.
I think we should probably skip to one a little further down
Sure.
and see if we can get, because I know there was a version of this where we had more art in
More
it.
toy?
Yeah.
I think.
Wait, I
There
think
was-
this was Max toy.
That was my memory of it as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
At least with this layout.
Yeah.
And I will say we were supposed to have Compton peeking into this toy box from up there.
Oh, yeah.
Which was going to be awesome, actually.
And that turned into him teleporting all over the place,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which people need to appreciate was an insanely complicated thing to figure out how to do.
That was my greatest achievement, was working on that. That was the one time Keys saw this. He's like, oh, actually, you did that right. Good job. I don't need to do anything else. That's fine. Yeah, so if we want to load the other one.
This is pretty
Still in
far,
there.
so.
Oh,
Oh,
we have full animation.
but
Oh.
look at that, the triple bell.
Yeah, still there. This is pretty
This is
far
pretty.
along.
Yeah, this is pretty far along.
This is pretty far along,
Except
but
for the figments aren't there yet.
Right, yeah.
yeah.
Here, let me try and get a little of an overview.
Yeah,
So
I
don't
wish
think
we
anything
had
changed
something a
here.
little more in between.
The
but-
pig. God, they all have.
There was one stage in between where there was a deep fryer over here,
Yeah.
but then we quickly just like snipped that out of the recipes and kept it to 4 stations.
Well, and I think that it was also not used until the very last
It was the last thing.
and it was just like there's this sort of like dark part of the map that you don't go to at all.
Do you still have Brainstorm?
Oh, that's a good.
I don't think you do.
Yeah, not.
So this seems like it's pretty close to what we ended up shooting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still has some proxy geo. but
Yeah,
not
some
a
quarry
ton.
stuff
Yeah.
there.
Is there anything in between?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh, really?
We
Nothing
not
would save.
saved off builds.
Yeah.
We after the Starbreeze contract ended, we didn't need to deliver builds to a publisher for a
so
while,
It's just all lost.
so we
in
didn't
time.
have
It's
saved
in the ether.
milestone
Yeah,
ones.
doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, people will recognize the bowling alley. That's the slide from Bowling Forward.
And there's like the sliding blocks on the rails. I'm not sure if we shipped those.
Oh, yeah. Those didn't, I mean, well, let's see.
I think we didn't.
They're
it
just
be-
blocks you can hit right now,
Yeah.
and they'll go poof. They're
Yeah.
left over from Hollis.
But you can see those little support structures are part of like the wooden toy
Yeah,
vibes.
There's still the like those were the little metal like wire toys.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and these things were supposed to actually kind of move along them and become moving things that you would have to
Hazards,
jump over,
yeah.
little hazards.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. I also do want to give credit to James and Joshua because they also stepped in on this level and like made a lot of improvements to how these different stations operated and like some of the hazards along the way. Like I remember James.
He did the griddle
He
stuff,
did the
right?
griddle stuff, like this little mini game here, which I really love. This was like probably the closest to like I think what we were aiming for all along
Yeah.
in terms of having like a really easy to understand mini game that you played that had like very few inputs but still like demanded your attention in the short term. But,
And
yeah.
it's just trampolines.
And it's just trampolines. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And you have this amazing frog
And
tongue.
it frogs. It makes a frog noise every time you jump on one of the directions.
Amazing.
I remember just doing the art for this because like Compton's main thing is he talks to animals. And there was the cooking element, and then we brought in a toy element. And what madness was that? Just like I was always wondering why we never did like.
Well,
animal
and there was
something.
there was never. supposed to be any dialogue for the stations, but since they had got faces, Tim wrote dialogue for them all.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
yeah.
It looks like this is
the-
not.
Original
Derek?
boss fight?
Right, weren't there commercial breaks? that
Yeah,
you
there
just
were
fought?
there were commercial
like
breaks, which were
fodder?
battle arenas that had like weird little setups.
Yeah, like over here. These look like these are the commercial break spaces, which turned into just the commercial breaks where you fight the judges, right?
Yeah.
But these would be specific arenas. And although these look like maybe they built up to where the final arena was, that's similar where you're throwing things into these.
Yeah.
These holes. And Joshua was the main designer on this, with Derek and Silvio and maybe Jason?
Jason.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing I'm sad we didn't get to build. I mean, I know we talked about it a million times, and Tim, in the end was right to like strip it out and just keep it focused to just the cooking show. But like the stuff that you had concepted, Emily, for like the trivia portion, like having the story be
was-
told in like a double dare thing where you were like using our existing dialogue tree tech to like select answers was so awesome. Like, and it would have had Sam and Dogan in there as well, which would have made Tucker happy. But it all just
Yeah, I
floating
think
off there.
like,
Came-
leaning into the like game show aesthetic did solve a lot of problems, which was nice.
What's the twinkling up there?
Yeah.
It looks like
Some fairy fire. and-
it looks like the dancing of a half of a mind, but or at least the kind of motion.
Yeah, what is this?
I forgot that I had
It's so
storyboarded
magical.
like an entire thing for this thing.
Yeah.
I actually really liked that one. It was like a
That's where Raz does.
What
his
is this
magical
magical-
It was
Sparkle
Raz
way.
and his sister. They were Frazee. They were a team
Yeah.
versus Sam and Dogan.
Oh.
Right?
it
Oh.
was so good.
Oh,
Oh, this is the delivery of
yeah.
the
This is the
judgment.
that,
Right.
that that's still there. So
This is a switch? Oh, that's death. All right. Well, with me falling to death, I think that's probably wrapping it up for Compton. But yeah, definitely it's interesting to see how similar that early thing was, but just like thematically very different.
Yeah.
Right. I wish we could show more brainstorm stuff, but honestly, it seems like it just we never really found a home for it.
I don't think you're gonna find it in this version, but like there was a place that I had all the ingredients laid out where you could see all the different states of everything and all the different possible combinations, which even in like woodblock form was impossible to read. So I think we made the right decision by not having that be the way that this level worked. Yeah, I don't know what the takeaway is, but just don't do that first bit. Don't make your level.
I don't know.
Too gigantic.
I don't think the final version could have existed without the. First
No,
Yeah.
you got to do that
like,
first.
I think even though there was a lot of work that we got rid of, it was still important to make the final level what it was. Which I think and this is not me because I
No,
I became the level lead, but I think that level is actually one of my favorites in the game, just because it's so like hyper themed, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is definitely a departure from a lot of the levels are just a lot of platforming. This one still has elements of that, but it was like let's just like explore other aspects, And I think if you hadn't done the first gone and exploring on the first version, you would have ended up with all the cool stuff that just condensed into this,
Right.
Yeah, I always kind of thought of this level as like the earlier game version of Waterloo World from the first game.
Yeah.
Where it's just like there's not a dedicated power to it, but the theme of the level is so strong that it's like kind of really stands on its own, even though it doesn't have a mechanical power that Raz carries forward.
Yeah.
It's a little palate cleanser.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've been liberated from the shackles of exploration and platforming.
Yeah. You can see the entire room
story.
Yeah.
It's cool.
However briefly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for cramming in here. This is probably the maximum capacity that we can fit.
We could get someone laying across the
We could get
table.
more.
Yeah, we'll just get Tim to lie on the table.
He's been under this desk the whole time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks,
All right.
Thanks, you guys.
Am I a Paul?
Yeah, Paul.
Cut.
Cut.